Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Those words, spoken by Martin Luther King Jr. 6 decades ago, still burn with truth today. My brothers, my sisters, we stand in a world where the chains are no longer iron, but invisible. The chains are data routes, toll booths of information, and the algorithms that tell us what is worthy to be seen and what must remain hidden. Now imagine this. On the red soil of Africa, a continent of 1,400,000,000 souls, something is stirring. For generations, their voices traveled across oceans before reaching their neighbors. Every message was taxed by distance, every dream slowed by someone else's gatekeeper. But suddenly, like a shout in the wilderness, Africa flips the switch. No more detours through foreign servers. No more hidden fees to distant shareholders. No more voices drowned out by the power of far-off corporations. This, my friends, is not about Wi-Fi speeds or the convenience of a faster download. It is about dignity. It is about power. It is about who gets to decide the future. When a farmer in Ouagadougou can sell his harvest directly, when a student in Nairobi can search their own history without it being buried under Western names, when a nation declares that its internet belongs to its people, this is nothing short of revolution. And yet, here lies the question that shakes the world. When the oppressed finally reclaim the highways of the digital age, is it a threat to the world order? Or is it the beginning of a fairer one? Stay with me. Subscribe if you believe freedom still matters. Because the story we are about to unfold is not just Africa's story, it is yours too. When we talk about freedom, my friends, we often picture marches in the streets, raised fists in the air, and voices lifted in song. But let me take you to another battlefield. An invisible one fought not with batons and fire hoses, but with cables and codes. For decades, Africa lived under a strange kind of exile. Every email sent from Ghana to Nigeria, every search typed in Burkina Faso, every payment made in Kenya. Before reaching the neighbor next door, it was forced to travel thousands of miles across the Atlantic, through servers in Europe or the United States, before circling back home. Imagine mailing a letter to the house beside you, but first posting it to New York, waiting, and then watching it return. That, beloved, was the digital reality for millions. And it was not only slow, it was punishing. Africa, rich in people, rich in history, rich in creativity, was paying some of the highest internet costs on Earth. Not because there was no demand, not because the people lacked vision, but because they were renting space on someone else's highways. A family in Burkina Faso would spend a painful share of its income just to keep children connected for school. All the while, American corporations collected billions in profit year after year. But money was only part of the story. The greater loss was dignity. When you searched for the Mali Empire, the algorithms showed you Napoleon. When you sought your own heroes, your own stories, they were hidden under foreign narratives. The gatekeepers of information were not in Lagos or Dakar, not in Ouagadougou or Nairobi, but in Silicon Valley, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. These giants did not merely provide services. They controlled the gates. They decided what was amplified and what was silenced. It was dependency disguised as progress. It was submission packaged as modernity. The pattern was not new. It mirrored centuries of history. Gold, cocoa, cotton, oil, all flowing outward while influence and wealth flowed inward. This time the resource was invisible but no less valuable. Data. And into this story steps a young man with fire in his eyes and steel in his voice. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Barely in his mid-30s, he carries the spirit of a generation that refuses to inherit chains, no matter how polished, no matter how digital. His message was simple, yet it shook the halls of power. Sovereignty is not a slogan. It must be built into the very foundations of life. From the gold beneath the soil, to the food that fills the table, to the data that flows through the cables, Africa must stand on its own feet. He laid out two paths before his people. The first path was familiar: safety, independence. Continue paying inflated fees to foreign shareholders, continue sending knowledge through foreign gates, continue living under a digital empire. It was predictable, yes, but it was also perpetual subordination. The second path was new, untested, and full of risk: the path of freedom. To build their own digital highways, to lay 100,000 kilometers of fiber, to raise 47 data centers, to create a protocol designed not to bow to Silicon Valley's monopoly. It would be costly, it would be uncertain, and it would invite resistance from powerful forces. But it would also mean reclaiming control, reclaiming jobs, reclaiming dignity. The $50 billion once drained annually from Africa could stay at home, fueling innovation, paying engineers, building startups. For the farmer in Bobo-Dioulasso, that choice meant selling grain at a fairer price. For the student in Nairobi, it meant seeing African history appear first in search results. For the young coder in Lagos, it meant building an app that reached millions without being filtered by distant algorithms. This was no longer a question of technology. It was a question of destiny. The tension between safety and dependence and danger and freedom, that, my friends, is the heart of this drama. And so the stage was set. Africa had lived too long as a tenant on someone else's digital property. Now a new generation dared to ask, what if we built our own? The answer, when it came, would shake Silicon Valley itself. But would Africa dare to flip the switch? And if it did, what storm would it unleash upon the world? And then, my brothers and sisters, the day arrived. After years of talk, after whispers of doubt and storms of resistance, Africa flipped the switch. What happened in those hours will be remembered like a thunderclap across the ages. Within days, 200 million Africans moved to the new system. 200 million. Not Facebook, not TikTok, not even WhatsApp had ever seen such an exodus, such a migration of people in so short a time. It was not a trickle, it was a flood. The earth shook and the walls of the digital Jericho began to fall. And the giants trembled. In Silicon Valley, boardrooms filled with fear. Google's crawlers, built to index every corner of the earth, hit a wall. Microsoft's cloud, designed to penetrate every system, found itself shut out. The African protocol was deliberately incompatible. The monopoly was broken at the root. Executives who once commanded the digital kingdom like emperors now sat in emergency meetings, staring at maps of a continent they thought they controlled, and realizing the gates were closing. But the crisis was not only in California. In Washington, lawmakers convened, their voices tight with anxiety. Could this rebellion be punished? Could sanctions be justified in the name of digital security? In Paris and London, headlines cried of a splintered internet, as if Africa's sovereignty was a threat to civilization itself. Behind those words was not fear of fragmentation, but fear of losing control. And while the West fumed, across Africa something electric was happening. In Nairobi, students streamed lectures without interruption for the first time in their lives. In Lagos, businesses saved money as payments no longer detoured through Europe. In Ouagadougou, journalists typed in their native language and saw African voices appear first, not buried under Western summaries. The world called it chaos. Africans called it freedom. But do not think, beloved, that the road was smooth. Resistance came fast and fierce. Western analysts dismissed the move as reckless, predicting collapse within weeks. Lobbyists from Silicon Valley pressed African governments, whispering of instability, warning that the system cannot last. Some African officials, weary and cautious, wondered if the burden was too heavy. Could local infrastructure bear billions of daily transactions? Could young engineers manage what trillion-dollar corporations struggled to control? The doubt was real. The fear was tangible. For a moment, it seemed as though the old order might win by default. But faith in sovereignty, faith in dignity, did not falter. Across deserts and jungles, fiber optic cables were laid. Across capitals, data centers rose from the ground. When the switch was flipped, it was not collapse that came, but astonishment. The benefits were immediate and undeniable. Farmers found fairer markets. Teachers reached students in remote villages. Doctors shared data without foreign eyes watching. And the people saw with their own eyes that dependence was not destiny. The storm, however, did not pass. It spread. In New York, analysts scrambled to explain the impossible. In London, editors admitted that no Silicon Valley platform had ever matched Africa's lightning growth. In Brasilia and Buenos Aires, leaders whispered, "If Africa can do it, why not us?" In Asia, where governments were already testing regional networks, the African breakthrough was proof that independence on such a scale was not only possible, it was powerful. And so the paradox deepened. For generations, the West had celebrated self-reliance as a virtue. But when Africa stood up and declared, "We will no longer rent our destiny," suspicion filled the air, hostility followed close behind. For Ibrahim Traoré, the crisis was not a setback, it was validation. Standing before his people, he declared, "Dependence ends the day we decide it ends." His words spread like wildfire across African social media, turned into hashtags, posters, chants in the streets. Young people repeated them as both shield and challenge. Sovereignty must not only be claimed, it must be defended. The high tide had come. The gates were broken. The world order was trembling. But beneath the celebration lingered a heavier question, whispered in corridors and shouted in rallies. Was this a victory, or the beginning of a longer, harder struggle? For the first time in history, the digital empire had been shaken. But could Africa endure the weight of the freedom it had claimed? When the dust settled, when the cables hummed with new life, the first fruits of freedom began to appear. And beloved, they were not abstract. They were real. They were immediate. They were personal. In Nairobi, students who once sat in crowded halls watching the internet buffer for minutes on end now streamed their lectures smoothly. Knowledge no longer arrived late, no longer filtered through foreign servers. For the first time, the internet felt like it belonged to them. In Lagos, shopkeepers and small businesses discovered their payments were faster and cheaper. No more detours through Europe. No more fees bleeding into distant bank accounts. The money stayed home. It circulated in the community. It built trust where once there had been only exploitation. In Ouagadougou, journalists typed in their native languages and found their own scholars, their own histories, rising to the top of search results, no longer buried beneath Western narratives. For centuries, Africa's voices had been silenced. Now, at last, they rose above the noise. And it did not stop there. A farmer in Bobo-Dioulasso used a locally built app to track weather and sell harvests at fair prices. A rural doctor shared patient data securely without foreign eyes watching. A family that once had to choose between groceries and an internet bill now could afford both. Each story was small, but woven together they painted a tapestry of dignity restored. The numbers told their own tale. $50 billion once drained from Africa every year was no longer sent overseas. It stayed in the continent. It funded engineers. It built data centers. It seeded startups. Each dollar became a brick in the house of sovereignty, and young Africans felt it. They turned to Traoré's words into songs, into hashtags, into murals painted on the walls of Dakar and Accra. Our data, our destiny. Sovereignty now. Our hands, our life, our future. Slogans once spoken in speeches became the heartbeat of a generation. But freedom, my friends, is never simple. With independence came new temptations, new responsibilities. Civil society groups warned, sovereignty must not become another word for control. Governments must not use this power to silence dissent. The struggle had shifted from fighting monopolies abroad to proving liberty at home. Still, the tide of hope ran strong. Across Africa, there was astonishment, almost disbelief. For years, they had been told, you are too poor, too divided, too dependent to build something of this scale. Yet here it was, humming beneath their feet, glowing in their cities. Proof that destiny could be rewritten. Outside Africa, the impact was just as profound. Analysts in New York confessed they had never seen such adoption. Journalists in London admitted the old narratives were crumbling. And in South America and Asia, leaders whispered, if Africa can stand, perhaps we can too. What began as a regional rebellion was fast becoming a global conversation. But beneath the joy lingered the sobering truth. Freedom is costly. To keep those cables alive, to keep those centers running, discipline would be required. Not just defiance, but governance. Not only rebellion, but responsibility. So here we stand, at a crossroads once again. The benefits are undeniable. The dignity is palpable. But the question remains, can Africa defend what it has built? Can this generation carry the burden of sovereignty without faltering? Freedom has arrived, but can it endure? Tell me in the comments, do you believe this generation is ready to carry the weight of independence? Brothers and sisters, let us pause and lift our eyes across the ocean. For while the cables hum beneath African soil, the echoes reach Washington, Paris, London, and yes, even the living rooms of America. For older Americans, these scenes may stir old memories. Some of you remember the long marches of the civil rights era when men and women demanded dignity against impossible odds. Some of you remember the Cold War when the world lived in the shadow of nuclear fire, and every choice felt like it could tip the scales of history. Others recall the oil crises of the 1970s when foreign powers dictated the price of American life. Each moment carried the same hard lesson. Dependence is fragile. And now the battlefield is digital. Who owns your data? Who controls the knowledge that shapes your mind, the images that flood your screen, the information that tells you who you are? For Africans, the answer used to be simple. Corporations thousands of miles away. But with leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, that answer is shifting. The cords of dependency are being cut one by one. Yet in Washington, the mood is uneasy. Policymakers debate, should America intervene, negotiate, or punish? In Silicon Valley, CEOs press for action, terrified that a monopoly once thought eternal may now be breaking apart. In Paris and London, the fear is cultural, their old influence slipping through their fingers. But beyond the West, the response is different. In South America, leaders whisper about building their own continental networks. In Asia, governments see Africa's breakthrough as proof of their own ambitions. What began as a regional revolt is turning into a global movement. The age of one internet, ruled by a handful of corporations, may be ending. A new age of many internets, sovereign and self-determined, may be dawning. And here lies the question, beloved, is this fragmentation a threat, or is it a correction long overdue? When Europe defends its sovereignty, it is praised. When America stands firm, it is celebrated. But when Africa insists on the same dignity, it is called reckless, destabilizing, dangerous. What does that tell us about the old order? What does it tell us about who is allowed to be free? For the elders listening tonight, let me say it plain. The struggle you fought for in Selma, in Montgomery, in the streets of Detroit, it was about voice, dignity, and the right to decide your own future. That same spirit now beats in Ouagadougou and Nairobi. Different land, different language, but the same heartbeat. And so the stage is set, not only for Africa, but for the entire world. Will the nations accept a digital age of equals, or will they cling to an empire already crumbling? Beloved, every revolution is not an ending, but a beginning. Freedom once seized must be guarded. Independence once declared must be sustained. And so Africa now stands not on the finish line, but at the starting gate of a longer journey. The challenges are heavy. Building cables is one thing, building trust is another. Fiber can be laid across deserts, but discipline must be laid in the hearts of leaders. Servers can hold data, but they must never be turned into instruments of silence. Civil society cries out, do not replace one master with another. Do not let sovereignty become tyranny in disguise. The temptations are real. Governments may be tempted to tighten their grip, to censor, to control. Corporations may rise from within, eager to become new monopolies wearing local colors. And the world outside, make no mistake, will not stand idle. Pressures will mount, political, economic, cultural. Sanctions may threaten. Diplomats may scold. Lobbyists may whisper of instability. Yet opportunity shines brighter still. A generation of young engineers, coders, and dreamers now see their future not as exiles on someone else's platform, but as builders of their own house. Startups are blooming. Universities are training the next guardians of the digital frontier. Farmers, teachers, doctors, journalists all stand to gain from a network that belongs to them, not to shareholders an ocean away. And at the heart of this stands a symbol, Ibrahim Traoré. Young, determined, unafraid. But even he has said it plainly. This story is not about one man. It is about a people, a continent, a generation that refuses to inherit chains. His voice may rally, but their hands must build. So what is the road ahead? It is not paved with certainty. It is paved with courage. It is paved with sacrifice. It is paved with the daily discipline of a people determined to prove that sovereignty and liberty can walk hand in hand. Picture this. The lights of Ouagadougou glowing against the night. Cables carrying not only data, but destiny. A young student streaming lessons without delay. A farmer selling crops at a fair price. A coder watching her app spread across a continent. Each seen as ordinary, and yet each is revolutionary. This is not just Africa's tomorrow. It is a mirror for the whole world. And the question hangs in the air like a call to prayer. Will the seed of sovereignty planted in Africa grow into a forest of freedom that spans the earth? The harvest of freedom has only begun. But will the world nurture this growth or seek to cut it down? Beloved, as we draw this story to a close, let us not think of it as an ending. Let us see it as a beginning, a spark, a seed, a calling. For centuries, Africa's wealth flowed outward: gold, cocoa, cotton, oil, and yes, even the invisible wealth of data. But now, with cables laid and centers rising, that flow has begun to reverse. Picture Ouagadougou at night, its lights glowing like embers of a new dawn. Beneath the streets run the veins of a sovereign future. Not just data, but dignity. Not just signals, but sovereignty. A continent long told to wait, to follow, to submit, now stands and declares, we are no longer passengers. We are drivers. We build our own roads. And in the center of this story stands a young leader, Ibrahim Traoré. To some, he is bold. To others, reckless. But to millions, he is a symbol of defiance, of vision, of hope. They call him dangerous because he refuses to bow. They call him feared because he dares to lead without permission. And so the question echoes, why millions see him as Africa's most feared young leader? Is it because he threatens peace or because he threatens an old order built on dependence? My brothers, my sisters, the lesson is not Africa's alone. For those of you in America who remember Selma, who remember Detroit, who remember the marches that shook this land, you know what it is to demand dignity. You know what it is to carry the burden of freedom. And now you see it again, across an ocean, in a new generation's struggle. So I leave you with this. Freedom is never given. It is always claimed. Dependence ends the day a people decide it ends. The question then is not whether Africa has chosen. The question is, will the world honor that choice or resist it? If this story touched your spirit, let it not stop here. Leave a comment with what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe freedom deserves to travel farther than any cable, then subscribe today, so that together we may witness the next chapter. Because history is not written by those who wait. It is written by those who walk forward. And tonight, Africa has begun to walk.